So welcome, Earthlings. So Ronnie, we're back.
We're back. Yeah, we're still alive, even though we've people might have thought we weren't alive because it's been when was our previous show? It was Christmas Day, wasn't it? Our last one. It's been over a month.
Oh, was that the one?
Yeah, we did a show Christmas. We did a show Christmas Day as part of your Christmas special. Your 10-hour Christmas special, didn't we? Yeah.
We get old to even remember when our last show was.
Yeah.
So anyway, as Ronnie said, we are still alive. So we've got a packed show tonight, as the two Ronnies always used to say. Ronnie, shame my name's not Ronnie, really, isn't it? But let me do a little bit of housekeeping first. So the first one in was Michael. Welcome, Michael. And then Jennifer was next, and then we've got quite a few piling in now. Deb, how you doing? We've got Carolyn Harris. Welcome. Kate J. Keystone Eon. Have I missed anybody? I don't think so. As always, you know the score now, so I won't labor this, but if you want to take the fullest part in the chat, then it's best on my YouTube channel. And then in terms of your contribution to the show, just comment away, because we never use super chats or anything like that. We don't believe in them. So chat away to your heart's content. Now, it's not only been a long time, Ronnie, but also, I mean, to the extent that we can ever call any of our shows organized, this one's probably the least one for a while. And one of the reasons for that, to be honest, is that I've had difficulty concentrating on, setting this up. And so I thought it'd be interesting for you to comment on that first, in the sense that, we've been through, oops, let me put my mic on. We've been through all kinds of things, Thatcher and the Falklands and, Iraq and all the rest of it and all that. But at the moment, things seem somehow worse for me. And I'm almost like not being able to concentrate on anything. It's as though, there's some kind of, definite terrible thing about to happen. Am I seeing this wrong or what?
No, I think it's true. I think things are worse, politically, especially, what's going on in the United States. And you've got Gaza, you've got the Ukraine war still carrying on, several other wars in the world as well that are kind of just as big as those as well, and it's and the government here, just terrible, There's people were pleased to get the Tories out, and now this lot are just seem to be just as bad, like politically. Yeah, this is it is a really bad time.
Yeah. Well, in Britain, I mean, across the water from me, obviously, but they've just been announced that the far right party, Reform.
Yes, that if there was an election now, they might win. And yeah, this is incredibly disturbing, and it's the same, throughout Europe, that you've got parties of the far right on the rise. And I think it's very relevant to this show that we're doing tonight, because we have to ask ourselves, why are these people in power? Why is Trump in power? Why Starmer in power? Why haven't we got someone better than Starmer? Why are these right-wing politicians getting into power throughout the world? Well, they're not led by magic. They didn't kind of come down from the sky and impose themselves. They were voted in by large numbers of ordinary people. And Hitler was initially voted in. Hitler was voted in by a large number of ordinary people initially before he sort of became a dictator. And so, unless we radically change the mindset of a large number of ordinary people, this is always going to happen, isn't it? This is always going to happen. This is the problem, and I think that's never been properly addressed in terms of educating people to kind of to think differently, to see the world differently. Unless that's done,
I mean, if I may be allowed to put a little bit of an academic gloss on that, it was the 1950s, 1960s, certainly by the time we get to the late 80s, where the people left academics had given up on the working class because they no longer saw them as a revolutionary agent, and they started looking elsewhere, not least, and this is interesting from our point of view, to social movements, the feminist movement, the civil rights movement, and all that. But they weren't looking at the working class as the revolutionary agent because they were seen as being bought off. Now, those same people are still bought off. So how are they going to ever, vote for what we would regard as?
They're not. I mean, a lot of them either don't vote or vote for reactionary parties. I mean, a lot of the support for Reform UK is coming from people who normally vote Labour, for instance. That's a big part of their support, and it's because there's been, intermission effort made to educate people, because I think the emphasis all the time is like on is kind of on protest. Let's protest against this. Let's protest against that. And very little emphasis on education. So therefore, these protests are carried out that they very rarely achieve anything. An example is a couple of million people marched in London against the UK's involvement in the Iraq War, and Tony Blair still went ahead and involved the UK in that horrific war. That's just one example. There's like loads of examples of that.
Yeah, but it still doesn't say much for the working class, though, does it?
The thing is, you're not going to be, if people are educated to think radically differently about the world, and to change their attitudes, radically in a much more positive way, then they're always going to, there'll always be this tendency. There'll always be a danger of people voting.
In terms of what people have been educated for now, the rank and file of the population, let's call it, is that the problems are people coming over in small boats, it's immigration, it's poor people who are taking all your money and all the rest of it, and all that. Nobody's talking about the oligarchs. Nobody is seeing it that way. Do you know this theory called shock and awe, Ronnie? Shock and awe?
Not sure. Tell me.
Yeah, so it's this idea, and Trump tried this in the first term, and it's worse now, which is this kind of idea that you just flood society with all these changes, and it gets to the stage where the population and the media, which are almost given up anyway, they can't concentrate on one thing at a time, and so they get flooded with different things. Is the problem here or is the problem there, and all that, and then people, it's almost like it almost becomes a kind of fatigue. People kind of give up. They're overloaded with information, but it's a strategy.
Yes, I think social media and that adds to it, because that gives so much opportunity to spread all these different things, doesn't it? It didn't exist in the past.
That's the name of it, Project 2025.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And of course, it would have been harder to do something like that, years ago when there wasn't social media, because that's a big platform, big way that they spread all this stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, again, you see, that's interesting, isn't it? Because you think, well, look, in the age of the social media, the ruling elite, ruling class, whatever you want to call them, will never be able to get away with what they used to be able to get away when, people used to wait months to get news from abroad and this kind of stuff. There's quite a lot of interesting sociology on that. But we've just had over a year's worth of a live genocide, and they've got away with it.
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah,
yeah. And so, even the fact that everybody's got a computer, worldwide communication in their pocket, has not been able to stop that.
No, because the propaganda comes from these people. Of course, the rich and powerful want people to, to hate on, other poor people coming from other countries, don't they? Because that distracts attention from them, and they can carry on making their money and at the expense.
What's actually going on?
Yeah, exactly. So they want that. They want that they want that attention diverted from them, so they can carry on making loads of money, exploiting people, etc., destroying the environment, destroying other animals. While everyone hates on some poor person coming over in a boat because the situation in their country is desperate, probably because it's been bombed by arms perhaps made in this country by one of the arms manufacturers. And that's the problem. And so, there's all this propaganda, like the tabloids. A lot of poorer people read tabloids like The Sun that are, very, very right wing in the propaganda they put out. The Daily Mail, for instance, horrendous. And so that the people are indoctrinated with all this stuff. We have to counter that. We have to counter that with our own information. And hopefully that we succeed in doing that. And I think that's we've failed to do that. I think people with more progressive ideas have failed to do that. Because I think the emphasis has been on let's do demonstrations, let's cause disruption. It's been on that. When at the end of the day, the government's able to crush that, the government's able to bring in, harsh laws against people involved in that. And because the focus is on that rather than education, it means
that does indeed focus on our topic today. So
yes, of course, yeah.
Just for the people who have tuned in late and thinking, what the hell is this? This all started from me just saying that at the moment I'm feeling a little bit weird about everything.
What I'd say to you, though, Roger, and anyone who's mightily depressed by the current world political situation is the old Chinese proverb that I'm always quoting, and that is better to light one small candle than to curse the darkness. And I think sometimes we can become over focused on all the negativity and not spend enough time doing what it is that might change things, or has a chance to change.
I agree with that, Ronnie. And up to now, I've been able to manage to keep, by and large, fairly optimistic about things. I think one of the things that have not helped is this issue of the world seems to be moving right politically, but it's also crept into the movement.
Yes,
which is not only disappointing, it's probably something that people of our generation possibly didn't ever foresee happening, but it has, right?
I think there are a lot of things we didn't foresee right in the early days, and when we first came into the movement. But the same thing applies once against education. You want it. I mean, fundamentally, veganism is the solution to all this. Veganism, according to the true nature of veganism, the true meaning of veganism, is what is actually needed to combat all this. That's the philosophy we have to spread in order to save the world, basically. And so, our task is to educate as many people as possible to become vegan, but also to educate as many people who identify as vegan about what the real meaning of veganism is. It's like this concept of outreach and inreach, isn't it? Both those things are really important, and all of it's education, isn't it?
Yeah, well, vegan education is not going to work according to that's a little bit unkind. So what we're doing today, folks, is that Jake Conroy put out a recent video. So this is like a response to that. And also because Jake is asking for more dialogue, more debate, and more engagement with this topic and everything. And so this is our element of that. And then after this show, we're going to invite him to come on for a kind of third thing. So here's his first, this now is second, and then hopefully we might be able to do something together, kind of thrash this out, but we'll see. But this is our response, and our response to Jake is kind of nuanced in the sense, Ronnie, because we agree with some of the things he says, and we don't with others. That's the way it works. But just to kind of set the seal or scene, if people don't know what we're talking about, let me just bring this one up. Okay, so this is Geordie Kazmajata, and he's talking about the closure, which was what, about 3 or 4 days ago now, right?
It was, Saturday just gone, I think, was their last day.
Yeah, and so what Jake has suggested or alluded to a little bit is that what this is showing is that, because of the prominence of Earthling Ed and the fact that his restaurant in London has just closed, it's another indication of the limitations of vegan outreach, right? And so what Jake tends to do is say towards the end of his videos, we need a whole range of things. But he always says that in a particular way. We need a whole range of things aimed at pressure campaigns against the supply side. And so that's the bit that we don't fully kind of agree with, right?
Mm.
And so Jody goes through quite a lot of issues about the fact that, restaurants have had it really bad in recent times. So there's lots of different issues that could play into it. I mean, as soon as I heard the news, I was thinking, well, does it mean that maybe Ed's place was expensive? And then I had a look on the web, and it said one site said it was cheap, but then in terms of the feedback from the customers, people were saying it's a bit on the pricey side. So it's not clear whether, in overall terms, it would have been regarded as cheap or not.
Well, I mean, it was in London, and London prices tend to be higher than elsewhere in the country. Compared with some of the restaurants or vegan eating places that I go to sort of fairly locally to here, his prices weren't that much more than what we pay at some places around here.
Even though it's in London, I get the
and it's in London as well. And you're talking about good quality food. So I don't know to what extent prices are to blame for this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was just kind of one issue.
Yeah.
Let me just pick up on what Ricky's saying here. I think that Jake does say that he believes there's too much emphasis on it, and it's not that it doesn't work. Well, he does say that sometimes. He has said things like, we've been doing it for a long time and it hasn't worked, this kind of stuff, which from our point of view isn't really true.
I think the crux of this is to do with emphasis. I think what we're talking about is emphasis, and I think it's true that Jake would like to see, the emphasis of the movement, in a sense, to be on pressure campaigning, meaning it wouldn't be on vegan outreach, whereas our position is the other way around. So it's to do with emphasis, really.
Yeah. Also, the idea that there's a heck of a lot of vegan education going on and not much pressure campaigning. I think our position would be that there is a lack of both. We often get a feeling in the movement, don't we, that there's vegan education is really taken off. There's loads of it, and it's happening all the time. It's all over the place. Now, that really isn't true.
No, that's not true. There's a lack of activism in general, and I think the number one problem is a lack of activism. Is and really a lack of a lack of vegans that become active. I think that's that's the fundamental problem. Whatever that activism is, there's a general lack of activism, and a lot less activism these days than than in the past, in a sense, where you'd get, say, just for one example, the National Animal Liberation Leagues back in the day. What would that have been in the 1980s? Where you'd have several hundred people kind of raiding a place, wouldn't you? You'd never get that these days, and you'd struggle to get a few hundred people, that number of people at a demo, but none of them would raid the place. And so you've got a problem with numbers, and also a problem with, in a sense, with kind of commitment as well. What those people will actually be prepared to do, in addition. And I think there's a number of factors that, reasons why numbers are low these days compared.
I think it's that's one of the things that we wanted to say, that we think that the analysis of this is a little bit threadbare from Jake's point of view. There's lots and lots of different nuances. Not least, Geordie was talking about the fact that being a vegan restaurant or a plant-based restaurant itself brings up variables that don't necessarily apply to others. All restaurants are struggling, but you've also got this thing about, do you use the kind of alternative, meats and all that kind of stuff, or should it be more whole food? There's other factors that will bring people in to a vegan restaurant, or probably even make them not want to go, right?
Yes, I mean, you get both types. We have both types locally. We have some that are very, have kind of really kind of healthy food, made from basic ingredients, and very little of the kind of, the processed food. And then you get others that are like a kind of much more based on processed food.
That's about the only thing you can get. Let me bring Vegan for Life back in. I was thinking, this is another one on my list. What about geographically? So the location of Unity Diner wasn't good, and the ambience not good either. Not a patch on the first location. So I didn't actually know it was in two locations, actually. So that's
I didn't. I mean, I'd never been to either of them, so I can't say.
It was in Spitalfields in London. So this is where Jack the Ripper did his stuff.
I think.
I don't think that's connected.
I think near there, yeah. It was around that way, it's around that way.
I don't think it's connected. But then there's other areas.
I don't think so.
Was it badly run? Was it cramped? He said the ambience not good. But
well, it could be.
Now, what was the eating experience? These are
really
factors, aren't they? Yeah.
I mean, when a place calls itself a diner, I'm kind of immediately put off a bit, because that conjures up, in my mind, something that's kind of quite cold in its, in terms of the ambience. We had a place fairly locally that was called a diner, and it was a vegan cafe, and it was really kind of Spartan in there, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And so that would, calling it a diner it wouldn't stop me necessarily going there, but it would kind of make me wonder how.
Well, you can't use that. You can't use that against all diners, Ronnie.
Well, no, but just the idea of a
diner and a cocktail bar.
The idea, no, I think that the idea of a diner is it kind of conjures up in my mind somewhere that's not very cozy. I mean, I like places to be cozy. I like these places that have got all different shaped tables and all different shaped chairs, and and
when you go in, you want the staff to be handing you a sleeping bag and all that, and
well, that maybe got us, where there's perhaps a sofa that people can sit in round a table, and it's kind of, that's a place. That's the kind of place I like. That's kind of a bit reminiscent of like the old tea shops we used to have, back in the day. That kind of place. Not like an American sort of everything's clean cut and everything's the same, and the tables are like kind of metal and that kind of really puts me off. That's my image of a diner. It's an American, like a kind of sort of American thing, isn't it?
Yeah. In fact, Jennifer says that. Isn't that kind of like Eddie Rockets? I don't know. Do you get Eddie Rockets over in England, Ronnie?
No, never heard of it before, actually.
Oh yeah, well, it's an Irish thing then, but it's very kind of
The rock, I don't like that.
1950s rock and roll, and the kind of bar stools they used to have.
Yeah, no, I like places where you've got a sofa where they've just got second-hand tables and they're all different, and second-hand chairs and they're all different, and the tablecloths are all different, and the teapots are like all second-hand and they're all different. That's the sort of place I like.
Yeah, Kevin's asking what the purpose is. I mean, I think it was supposed to be a going concern as a diner or a restaurant, but it did raise money for the sanctuary, and now there's a fundraiser to try to get money for the sanctuary now that this source is gone.
I think that vegan cafes and vegan restaurants do have a role in education, or they should have a role in education. I think most of them don't do enough in that regard. That they don't do enough to spread the message of kind of ethical veganism, or the ethics of veganism, shall we say. And I mean, like some of them, it's almost as if, people could say to themselves, shall we Italian today? Shall we eat Chinese? Shall we eat Indian? Or maybe we eat vegan? It's like another choice of cuisine, rather than something that's that's got kind of like a philosophical basis to it, if you see what I mean. And I think these restaurants and cafes could be doing a lot more to promote the vegan message than they do, or most of them could.
Yeah, but they'll probably see that as a means of dissuading people from going.
I think it very much depends how you do it. You wouldn't have graphic images on the wall. That would put people off. But I think there could be gentle education done in these places. Like like some pleasant pictures of animals on the wall with a message about about animal products, or something that would put it in people's heads. Put the ethic of veganism into people's heads, and a lot of them kind of don't do that.
Well, should we play the first clip then? So
yes.
What we've done, right, is we've got Cranky's thing, and I've kind of just cut out the things that I thought wasn't completely necessary at all. But if you go to Cranky Vegan on YouTube, you can see the full thing. So I think the actual thing is about 7 minutes long, and this one now is 5 minutes. So I've kind of cut 2. So if you want to check whether you think I've been fair on that, then that's the place to do it. So I've split this into 3. So we'll go through it in stages. So this is, as it were, stage 1. Let me see if I can get the technology right.
I should make another video about supply and demand and vegan outreach and the failures in our movement's thinking about both of those things. And today, it happens to be your lucky day, because that's this video. So there's been a lot happening lately around the world in our movement and the movement bubble, as well as even on my channel's comment section that relates to the topic. And they've kind of served as a good reminder that this is a conversation we probably should be having more regularly. So you may have heard a lot about this restaurant called Sage Plant Bistro and Brewery in Los Angeles, and how recently it became Sage Regenerative Kitchen, meaning they stopped being plant-based and added animals to the menu, unfortunately. Vegans obviously weren't happy, and rightfully so. So when it announced it was closing just 7 months later, vegans rejoiced. They were stoked. See what happens when you give up on plant-based foods, when you turn your back on veganism, you close. There was a resounding voice from the movement about how people didn't want that place to serve dead animals, and through demand, or the lack thereof, the restaurant closed. But that made me think, did the lack of demand really shut that place down? And what does that say about Unity Diner? You know the place, Earthling Ed's diner over in London. I mean, I have to say, I wish I could go to the UK because that food looks incredible. But there wasn't enough demand to keep it open in London? I mean, we hear all the time that there's a huge surge of vegans in the UK, and surely their buying power is making plant-based eating boom, but Maybe not. So vegans' demand was strong enough to shut down a restaurant that had been open for 14 years, but not strong enough to keep our beloved Earthling Ed shop up and running? I mean, I don't know. The reality is, both of those places shut down for the same reason. Supply. The supply chain, it's fucked. Everything is more expensive, primarily food and energy. Unity Diner said so themselves. They're shutting down because of soaring costs, and so did Sage. This started steamrolling back during COVID and just kind of kept on trucking. But we're seeing the restaurant industry just get tanked, including vegan restaurants, right? Because they started going under when people could no longer eat at restaurants during COVID. And when they could eat at restaurants, they couldn't really afford them anymore because the supply chains hit the restaurants hard, and they couldn't afford the operational costs. And I hear what you're saying. It's the demand. Restaurants are closing because consumers can't afford to eat there anymore. And this is true. I hear what you're saying. But they can't afford to eat there anymore because the supply chain and industry has jacked up the prices so high that the increased costs are then passed on to the consumer. All that to say, we can look at real world scenarios where the actual demand versus supply debate is playing out in real time and see what's causing the problems, what's dismantling and disrupting these industries. And ultimately, that's what we as vegans want, right? We want to see or create as many problems in the industries we're opposed to, animal agriculture, fur, animals and entertainment, in order to really negatively impact them. And what's making that happen out there in the real world? The collapse of the supply chains, not the increase or decrease in demand.
Right, so that's Jake's first opening thing. That's the longest clip, by the way, and so but we don't want to spend too much time on it. But there's a lot there. Some of it is a bit contradictory. For example, he talks about this Sage restaurant in the States, I believe, which stopped being plant-based. The vegans rejoiced. Vegans complained. And then closed down, and the vegans rejoiced, right? And then he says, okay, he made this weird claim. He says, you know, have you heard also about Earthling Ed's place? Surely there must have been enough demand to keep that place open, presumably based on, you know, Earthling Ed's status or something like that. So he said vegan demand was strong enough to shut down a restaurant open for 14 years, but not strong enough to keep Ed's place open. Now, I think that's a real kind of mixed match of things that don't.
I don't see how.
Here.
I don't see how when that place went from vegan, place in the USA, went from a vegan to, you know, selling animal products, and then closed. How that closure was anything to do with the vegan demand? It would have been lack of demand in general, combined with a lot of other factors, wouldn't it? That's nothing to do with vegan demand. It's nothing to do with vegan demand that a place that sells non-vegan food closes. That's irrelevant, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like a weird claim. But I mean, also going back to the other resources that we've got, looking at the actual reasons, which Jake mentions. He says all restaurants have been really badly affected since COVID, vegan ones or plant-based ones included. So on that, we would agree. But then you've also got some additional things going on. Let me bring this in, for example. So this is from like an industry thing, and you picked out these issues, Ronnie.
Yes, it's from restaurant management website.
Well, I've got the article if you want the full thing, but I've also just cut these bits out. So do you want to stick with this, or do you want the actual article?
Well, stick with the screenshots, because I think that's kind of easier for people to see.
Yeah, so the independents have had extra problems, including things like rising rents, energy costs, blah, blah, blah. And so presumably a chain would be able to absorb those kind of costs a little bit easier. And he said many have been forced to downside or shutter altogether, which is an interesting way of putting it. And like one thing that is in the article that Jake showed briefly with Unity describing why they closed down was rising costs, and so he's saying that, you know, this is to do with the supply side. But what it also said was that the landlord had raised the rent, or wanted to raise the rent, and Ed was saying that he couldn't manage to do, you know, to bridge the gap. So, like I said, there's lots of different variables going on, you know. So just to say that it's the supply side, which obviously is important, but I don't see why the demand side isn't important as well, you know. And presumably, if we're having problems with the supply side, but the demand really kind of, you know, booms, that would then compensate, wouldn't it?
But you see, the thing is, how in any way does this impact on the exploitation and oppression of other animals for food? Because those people who aren't going to these restaurants, they're still eating, aren't they? You know, they're not kind of starving. They're just buying their animal products. You know, the restaurants that have closed. Say the ones that sell animal products, those ones that have closed for whatever reason, like the one in the USA. The people that went to those restaurants and now can no longer afford to, they've not stopped eating animal products. They're still eating the same amount of animal products. They're just getting them. They're doing it less expensively, and maybe the vegans that couldn't afford to go to a vegan restaurant, and maybe that was one of the factors why the vegan restaurant closed. Those vegans haven't stopped being vegan. You know, they're just getting their food more cheaply, aren't they? So whether or not these restaurants close, you know, has a kind of no impact on the situation.
It's almost a by the by. I mean, isn't it really the same argument of why Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers, they're struggling? But I mean, they're flying out the door when it comes to Aldi and Lidl and stuff, right?
Well, yes, you see, I think another reason why it's harder for vegan eating places these days is just, you know, there was another article on this same website, wasn't there, about the increase in vegan options, wasn't there? I don't know whether you're able to.
That's right. I'll put that up now.
Yeah.
If I get my set equipment ready. There you go. This one, you mean?
Yes. You see, it says that plant-based options, vegan plant-based options, expanding by 12%. And so you know, lots of places now have more vegan options. You see, now that, you know, that wouldn't be the case unless they thought there was a market for those options. So this is, you know, this is evidence of an increasing people wanting to consume, you know, vegan food, isn't it? But also it's a way in which people can be sort of attracted away from vegan restaurants. You know, if it's all these, I mean, at one time, you know, when vegan options were really poor, about the only place you get a decent vegan meal probably wasn't a vegan eat out and have a decent meal, wasn't a vegan restaurant or a vegan cafe. But that's by no means the case now, is it?
It's kind of, we're spoilt for choice, and of course, when that happens, you get like industry equilibrium. What tends to happen then is that, you know, because one of the problems, of course, is that all the kind of capitalist businesses, they just pile in as soon as they see there's a plant-based market, and so they all kind of flood the market, and then eventually, I always remember this with Marks and Spencer's in Ireland, at least. They used to have, I think it's called Plant Kitchen or something. And when they started that, you would get like 5 columns worth of stuff on the shelves, big display. And there's another supermarket called Super Value, which used to be the same, big, huge kind of plant-based display. Now, if you go into those supermarkets, they're still there, but a lot smaller, because it's kind of balanced out now. It's found its footing, and of course, some people are just going to be lost along the way, And what's gone on here is that one of those people who have suffered because of it and the increased rent from the landlord and all is Earthling Ed's place. But to use that one example then as a means of kind of saying, oh, vegan education, there's a massive problem.
It's an irrelevancy. It's kind of, it says nothing about, you know, whether or not vegan education works. It says nothing. It's irrelevant to it, isn't it? It's irrelevant to it. There's so many reasons why that place may have closed down. You know, it's obviously closed for a variety of reasons. It doesn't.
Maybe it wasn't advertised very well or something.
There could be loads of different reasons,
yeah.
and it doesn't show that there are any fewer vegans. It doesn't show that vegan education doesn't work. It doesn't show that vegan education is limited.
No,
in any way. It doesn't show.
What would be an interesting question, and people who are familiar with London might know, is are there other plant-based places close to this one, and are they still open? But the point is, there'll be a myriad reason to explain that as well, but none of it is relevant, as you said.
None of it's relevant. And the other thing is, okay, so you know, these places have been closed because, or Jack claims one of the problems they've closed is because of a problem with supply, and you know that might be a contributing factor. And then he's going on to say, well, therefore, that's what we should be doing as a movement. We should be like interfering with supply to somehow make a difference. But kind of how feasible is that? Like he talks about COVID. It's a worldwide pandemic that had, you know, sort of devastating, you know, massively changing effects, didn't it, in all sorts of ways, and we're still suffering from that today, aren't we? You know, the after effects of everything that happened.
Okay, so if we moved on to Jake's arguments about pressure campaigns, let's play the second clip.
Yes, sure, yeah.
Because that would be the most sensible thing in that respect.
Why are we, as a vegan movement, under the impression that an incredibly small minority of people, like if we're counting actual vegans and not plant-based eaters, we're talking like less than 1% of the population, that an incredibly small minority of people will be able to convince billions of people to change their lifestyles for good and tear down every fabric of society, thus creating change in a way that has never ever worked or happened before in the history of social change. We just straight up ignore the history and current actions of like every social justice movement ever and be like, you know what, we're gonna be different. Today's our day.
Today's my day. Brought a lunch and a soda.
This idea has become so inundated in the minds of our movement that we've based success on imaginary numbers that no actual value can be placed on. But people generally measure it based on how many people you have either one, made vegan, or two, reached with your vegan message, which leads me to respond, what the fuck does that mean? And the answer is, it means nothing. And here lies the second major issue of the demand versus supply argument. When it comes to this iteration of vegan outreach activism, there's no way to actually measure its success. Like, yes, of course, we're going to see the occasional vegan and the anecdote about how this person may be vegan or that person may be vegan. And we're going to see Veganuary's report saying this many number of people signed up and went vegan, and that led to this many animals being saved. And you hear influencers and their supporters claiming they've made thousands, even tens of thousands of vegans, and they've reached hundreds of thousands of people with their vegan message. But again, what the fuck does that even mean? The answer actually is pretty easy. You don't know.
Right, so I want to unpack that, but Ronnie, have you got any initial response to that?
Well, I mean, first of all, you know, I'd say that you know, proper widespread vegan outreach hasn't been. You can't call a thing a failure that hasn't really been tried. That's the thing, and proper widespread vegan outreach has never been tried. You know, we've really had relatively little vegan outreach, to be honest. And what goes on now tends to be, you know, pretty sporadic and mainly in the centre of big cities, for instance, in terms of, you know, out on the street outreach, for instance, it's very small in terms of what its potential could be if a lot more vegans could be persuaded to be involved in it. So basically, you know, you can't criticize a thing for failing when that thing has
but
never
in
really
terms
been
of what
tried.
he actually said, Ronnie, I think we both agree, because he says you can't measure it. There's no way to measure it, and I think we'll agree with that.
Well,
I mean,
the thing is,
we know the story about, you know, when AV were kind of like gearing up and they came up with the tally system, and they would make these exaggerated, oh, we've made 600 vegans today and all this kind of stuff. And then they realized that they couldn't really say that with any conviction. And so they changed it. Now, in that, Jake's right, isn't he?
yes, yes,
You can't tell for sure.
you can't. But I kind of I think there's too much emphasis on trying to find out how many people you've kind of converted to veganism or whatever.
It'd be nice to know, though, wouldn't it, Ronnie?
Well, in a sense, it'd be nice to know, but I think it's impossible to know, and I think it's impossible to know, you know, for several reasons. And I think one of the reasons is that very often people don't become vegan just because of one thing. There's a variety of different things, a variety of different exposures to the vegan message would eventually result in somebody becoming vegan. So to try and pin that down to one particular thing, whether it was a cube of truth or whatever, is, you know, is very difficult. I think there's two things we do know. One is that veganism is massively more widespread now than it was way back, way back at the time of the formation of vegan society.
And there's still not a lot of it, but in our day there wasn't any of it, right?
No, and you know, even when I became vegan in 1972, I'd never heard of veganism. Before I read the article that persuaded me to become vegan, I'd never ever heard the word vegan, never. And there was just, you know, the number of vegans around then was massively fewer than it was now. You couldn't eat out anywhere. It was very hard to operate socially as a vegan, and now that's so much different. That's changed so radically.
You have a drink, Ronnie, before you're not still alive.
Yeah,
but you know, I agree with that, and people are saying in the chat it's not measurable. But okay, so we're saying that there's a hell of a lot more now than there was, but there's still not much, though, Ronnie.
Well,
there's hardly any. If you think about any country you like, on any given day, how much vegan outreach, whether it's
no, there's very little, and that was the thing.
There's hardly any, is there? Still,
that this, you know, really huge change in terms of the increase in veganism has happened with really relatively little vegan outreach in terms of the potential. And the second thing that we know is how people become vegan. People become vegan after receiving information in one way or another. You know, that could be through a conversation, it could be through a leaflet, it could be through watching a video, seeing a poster,
media,
social media, or very often a combination of those things.
Yeah.
And so we know that the more, I mean, I became vegan after reading an article in a magazine. You know, that's what, you know, caused me to become vegan. And people, I'm most curious what caused people to become vegan, and it's just it can be anything, you know. With some it's videos, with some it's a conversation, with some it's a leaflet, some it's something on social media, all these things. So what we do know is that more information we can spread in all sorts of various forms about veganism, the more people will become vegan, because that is how we became vegan.
Yeah, well, I mean, that raises a really kind of complicated issue about, you know, kind of pragmatism versus abolitionism and stuff. But I mean, in terms of what we're talking about, I think we're going to end by agreeing with Jake that there's no way of measuring it. But what we do need is a hell of a lot more of it. He's also going to make a plea for pressure campaigning. And in a sense, we need a lot more of that as well, because just as if you look around the world any given day, there's hardly any vegan education. Well, there's hardly much pressure campaign going on either.
No,
Right? So we're on a low level of everything, aren't we?
Well, yes. I mean, yes, there's hardly ever any pressure campaigning going on, but very sadly, most pressure campaigning results in failure. You see, like, I mean, Jake spoke about the successes that have been achieved by pressure campaigning. All these social changes come about, through pressure campaign, through protests and things like that. But what are we seeing at the moment? Throughout the world, maybe particularly in the United States, but perhaps probably throughout the world in general, that all these gains that have been made through pressure campaigning are being rolled back, aren't they? They're being rolled back. They've been rolled back by reactionary regimes throughout the world. Like just here in the UK, the right to protest, for instance, been he brought in stronger laws against the right to protest. And it shows how these gains are in a sense built on sand, because the change in society hasn't gone deep enough. So you spend, there's a huge investment in all these campaigns and, all this kind of pressure exerted to bring about these changes. And then all you need is a reactionary government voted in, and they can just destroy them all. And so we've got to look at how do we kind of, secure those things more firmly. How do we prevent that kind of thing from happening? And you only prevent that from happening by educating ordinary people, because who is it that votes in the governments? As I said earlier, it's ordinary people that vote these governments in. So unless you change the mindset of a large number of ordinary people, there's also grave danger of all these gains that have been made just being rolled back, and being rolled back within no time, really.
Well, we can have an interesting conversation about how political parties get elected nowadays, and certainly funded and that kind of stuff. But going back to this kind of, just kind of deconstructing it a little bit, I found that the beginning of Jake's part of that was a bit weird, because he separates out here actual vegans from plant-based eaters on this occasion, as though plant-based eaters don't talk to people about their diet. So you can kind of separate them out. They're not doing any vegan outreach, which I would argue against. But I mean, obviously, it's not the same as being a vegan activist. But it's not as though it's this idea that there's some people often claim there's lots of silent vegans who won't speak to anybody about their veganism. I mean, I don't think I've known anybody like that. I mean, even if it's just your family or just your workmate, you tend to talk about it, right?
Yeah, I think anyone who's vegan is going to talk to someone else about why they're vegan. That's going to come up in conversation. And the same as anyone that's plant-based, the reasons why they're plant-based, maybe for health or maybe for the environment, that's going to come up in the conversation as well. So in the sense of spreading the message, yes, those things are going to come up in conversation. But I think that what we should be looking at as vegans is not doing the minimum. That is the kind of minimum that we can do, just be vegan. And then if someone else asks why we're vegan, tell them why, explain to them why we are. That's the kind of minimum, isn't it? The very, very minimum. But, what we need to be doing is not the minimum, but to do the maximum, trying to do the maximum we can to spread the message.
Yeah,
just the urgency of it is
whatever you're going to do, you try and do the maximum. But then Jake said something which I found really kind of a bit odd. He said, we're saying that this small percentage can convince billions of people to change their lifestyles for good, and that this small amount of people can tear down every fabric of society, as he puts it, thus creating change. But aren't we saying that about the pressure campaigns as well?
Well, yes, because you're going to have an even smaller number of people, aren't you?
Yeah, there's more people who are willing to do a bit of vegan education.
Well, because you see, vegan outreach can be done in very simple ways that can be fitted very easily into someone's life. Even that person leads a very busy life, because things like delivering leaflets, distributing leaflets, maybe doing a stall promoting veganism at a community event or something like that. These are all kind of fairly low key things, simple things that people can do in their local area that pose that pose no risk to those people. Whereas with pressure campaigning, you've got to kind of, you're putting yourself out there more, aren't you? You're kind of, very often maybe breaking the law or putting yourself at risk of arrest. These are things that are going to attract far fewer people, because far fewer people are in a position or feel they are in a position to do those things. So it's in terms of recruiting people to do a particular form of action, I think it's potentially much easier to recruit people to do vegan outreach than it is to recruit people to become involved in pressure campaigns.
Yeah. So I found that a bit weird. Then he talked about there's no way of measuring it, so we've covered that.
Yeah.
So let's move on then to the final part, which is quite short, but within that, Jake brings up something that he brings up a heck of a lot of time with this argument, where he talks about the difference. He differentiates the idea of a tactic from a strategy. And I think we'll probably need to say something about that, because I don't think we agree on that either. But let's bring it back in and see where we go from it. Bang. There we go.
All of this is to say that I don't think we should stop doing vegan outreach and talking to people about it. But what I think we drastically need to do is recognize the difference between a tactic and a strategy, and realize that outreach is just one tactic among a whole bunch. And you simply can't win by just doing one tactic. You can't win by just doing protests, or just doing undercover investigations, or just doing disruptions, or just talking to people about veganism. You have to smartly and strategically assemble them together into pressure campaigns that go after the supply, the industries of the things we abhor, the things that kill animals by the billions and billions. And by doing so, we create campaigns that can bring about tangible success for animals, while simultaneously outreaching people about veganism. We affect supply while also building up a foundation of committed individuals. But to ignore the supply side with the false illusion that we can create the numbers to bring world-changing demand not only fails our movement, but it fails the billions that will die because of it. Let's talk more about this, right? Let's discuss and debate and disagree and be okay in that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the reason why we're putting this together. If Jake does agree to come on, Ronnie, we'll have to teach him how to say simultaneous. But
yeah, I'd like to say, I don't know. I noticed the sign in the background was ACAB he had, which stands for All Coppers Are Bastards. Now, I strongly disagree with people displaying that, because
it's a bit of a side tangent here, though, Ronnie.
Yeah. No, because I noticed it. Because say we gain the ascendancy, and we vegans are in administration, and we want to stop people that are continuing to oppress and exploit other animals. Aren't we going to need some kind of police force to do that? How are we going to go about?
Well, it depends how many anarchists you talk to.
Or are we saying that? It's say like a wildlife officer who goes and arrests someone that's going out, persecuting free living beings, that police officer's a bastard. I think this is. I think that's using that slogan is really, really detrimental to our cause, and it means that we're concentrating on the wrong place. They're kind of concentrating on the police instead of concentrating on people that persecute our fellow animals, and I think I don't like that at all.
Okay, but can we?
That's just because I
can we
noticed that, and I thought I've got to say something about that
Yeah,
before.
can we just park that to one side for a minute?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so he's basically saying what we're saying is that we shouldn't stop anything really, and he then says that we need outreach, which involves more than one tactic. Now, I don't know anybody who is claiming that we should do one thing and one thing only for one thing. I don't know anybody who says that. I mean, if anything, some of the people who are doing some pressure campaigning are saying don't do vegan outreach, which Jake isn't saying.
No, Jake's not saying. But you see, I think the thing is, it's kind of if you look at what Jack's saying is that all these things assemble together and create a pressure campaign. Whereas I don't understand kind of what he means like that. How are we, how are we going to force these industries to stop doing what they're doing? Like how are we going to say put pressure on the food industry to stop oppressing and exploiting our fellow animals? How's that like effectively going to happen? Because if we look at an industry that's massively smaller than the food industry, say that's in terms of the here in the UK, in terms of the number of animals that are killed every year, is 2,000 times smaller than the food industry, and that is the vivisection industry. If we look at pressure campaigns that have been mounted against the vivisection industry, in the end, those campaigns have, they've initially had some success. They've been destroyed by the state. The state's moved in and destroyed those campaigns. And we get the SHAC campaign, the campaign to close hunting and life sciences, used as a model for pressure campaigns. And indeed, that was something Jake was heavily involved in. But the main lesson to learn from that campaign, it was crushed by the state. It was crushed by the state at the end of the day, and it didn't achieve its primary objective, which was the closure of hunting and life sciences, which is still open today, or operating under a different name, but that place is still open and still, torturing our fellow animals. That's the lesson to learn from it. And unless you do something about the state, that's what's going to happen. And that's what's going to happen. And you're there talking about a much smaller area of the oppression of other animals than you are with the food industry, for instance. So how in reality is pressure campaign going to be operated that is going to have any effect in terms of ending the exploitation of our fellow animals for food? It's kind of you kind of just can't see it. You just can't see it, can you? Unless
he is saying, I'm not saying abandon it. It's just it's got to be part of something else too.
Well, you see, the thing is, I think all these things have value. I think pressure campaigns. I think although the SHAC campaign failed in closing hunting and life sciences, I think it kind of can be argued, but perhaps it had a generalized effect on the on the vivisection industry, and perhaps there are fewer animal experiments taking place than otherwise would have been the case if the SHAC campaign hadn't existed. I mean, that that's a possibility. That's a possibility. But the problem is that all these gains from these type of campaigns are always going to be really, really limited unless we change society at a more fundamental level. Because unless you change society at a fundamental level, you'll always get these campaigns to be crushed by the state because the politicians are voted in by ordinary people, and we're not doing anything to change the way that ordinary people think. You know, that's the thing. And this is why
Yeah.
educate.
See what Ricky says here, which I mean, this is true, and which is why when you got Regal Rabbits and you got Hillgrove,
Yeah.
that they kind of succeeded to the extent that they did, but then it's almost like the movement almost then went, okay, we're doing great here, let's take on something big, as in HLS. Right, and in some senses, that was a kind of too big a target.
Yeah.
Because things like Regal Rabbits and Hillgrove and the guinea pig farm, all those kind of things. I mean, they weren't going to be bailed out by the government, whereas HLS was.
I think they feared the domino effect. See, once they took on something as powerful as big as HLS, then the rest of the vivisection industry kind of thought, well, if they succeed in bringing down HLS, who's going to be next? And somebody would have been next. That campaign would have so they said, right, we've got to make a stand. We've got to make a stand now, against these activists before we all get steamrolled. And that's what happened with the support of the state. And I think talking about, I mean, it's interesting about the campaign against the fur trader. What's happening now is you've got, I mean, the fur trade, the ALF played a really big part in sort of decimating the fur trade in this country. And what you've got now is, these outlets that are kind of selling garments that have got fur trim and stuff. There aren't any, you very rarely have full fur coats sold or anything like that, proper furriers anymore now, or department stores selling furs. You do get places like Canada Goose, and I think Flannels as well, for selling garments that in fur trim, maybe gloves made of fur and smaller items. And, there have been successful campaigns against those places. But to what extent were those campaigns of education rather than pressure campaigns? Because you see, but basically, if a store thinks that they're going to lose money because customers are being educated about what they do, and those customers won't go in there, then that's going to be, has a good chance of persuading them not to stock that particular product. So what we're talking about here, I'd say, is primarily educational campaigns. It's rather like the campaign against the dog racing industry. The dog racing industry in this country is it has been very much in decline for a number of years. We've had another major track closed just recently. And that, and the people outside the tracks protesting and stuff like that. And so it kind of looks like a pressure campaign, but it's actually a much more an educational campaign, because what happens is people going into the dog racing are being educated about what happens to the dogs. And so a lot of them don't go again. And so it results in those places losing money, and that can be a major factor in them closing. And so it's primarily not a pressure campaign. It's primarily a campaign of education, and it has been highly successful as in terms of an education campaign. So I think we've got to kind of look at that.
Yeah, okay. Well, as you said, Jake did say in that last thing that what we need to do is we need to have a strategy, and we would call that animal liberation. I don't know. Destroying cultural species and whatever. Now, it seems to me then that vegan education and pressure campaign can be seen as a tactic within that strategy. But the value for me, and I think our own personal story backs this up, the value now of a pressure campaign or anything else is to what extent does it facilitate education? Right. And so
yes,
that's exactly why we did the press office.
Yeah, I mean, I'd look at tactics and strategy a little bit different. I'd say that animal liberation was actually the goal, and the strategy is the means by which you achieve that goal, if you see what I mean. So you could say, well, that strategy we're going to employ to achieve animal liberation is vegan education. If we educate enough people to become vegan, then we can achieve animal liberation. So that's the strategy. Or you could say that the strategy was we're going to get all these pressure campaigns, and that's how we're going to destroy.
Are they interchangeable for you then, Ronnie?
Well, no,
Strategy,
no. The tactics. Say, for instance, we said, right, our strategy to achieve our goal of animal liberation is vegan education. Then the tactics would be all the different ways in which we did vegan education. That would be the tactics. The tactics would be, okay, one of our tactics to spread veganism will be, showing videos on the street, or another of our tactics would be distributing leaflets. So that's how I see the breakdown.
But Jake did talk about things like undercover investigations. So that would be a tactic to get.
It would be a tactic to maybe, within if the strategy was vegan outreach, then the undercover investigation would be
to get material for the vegan
material
outreach.
Exactly,
and also material for the media.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of how I look at the division between these things.
Yeah. But the thing that we don't agree with, because we kind of go along with that, and he goes, we need a whole bunch of things assembled together into a pressure campaign that goes after the supply. I don't know why he has to put that bit at the end.
Well, in a sense,
it's kind of like the supply only.
In a sense, you are. If you're talking about, say, the animal farming industries and the fishing industries, for instance, in a sense, what's happening is you are seeking to end the supply, because you are seeking to end, animal farming and to stop people going out and pulling fishes out of the ocean, aren't you? You are seeking to end the supply.
Yeah, but what if we look at things like prohibition in the States? You cut off the supply, the demand is still there.
The trouble is
with fox hunting in Britain, the people find a way around.
Yes. Yeah, that's the problem. Is that the best way in which you can stop the supply is by stopping the demand. If you see what I mean. That's the thing.
Again, Ricky brings this up in the sense that this is the actual problem here, is the fact that, we're just moving things around like chess pieces on a board, because, if you shut down a fur farm, they move to China and Russia. Like the British ones moved to Europe with using their compensation, because they were made multimillionaires. And then they got shut down a second time, got another set of compensation. And I don't know what they've done with their money now, but for sure, all the fur farmers of Britain will be multimillionaires now. Because
and what will they be doing with that?
Fur farms are closed down.
And what are they doing with that money? Is that invested in another form of the oppression of other animals?
I don't think they're going to open a tofu farm. Ronnie.
No. But it's very much the same. Another thing is this ban on live exports, or it's not a total ban on live exports, but it's a ban on a lot of live animals being exported, from the UK. That was heralded as a great victory, but I doubt that made any difference at all in terms of sparing other animals from suffering and slaughter, because the demand, the countries that receive those animals, right, they're still going to be demanding animals to be imported into those countries. So those animals are just going to be imported from somewhere else, aren't they, instead of the UK? And so instead of having long journeys from the UK to these other countries, they're going to have.
You've already got an example of that, haven't you, Ronnie, with the beagles, yeah?
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, beagles are flown into this country from other countries for experimentation. It's not just they're not just supplied from within the UK.
Yeah. So if the pressure campaign to stop the indigenous or internal campaign succeeded, then they get 100% then from overseas, which would continue the trade and increase the welfare problems, right?
Yeah. How you measure success, say a campaign against animal experimentation, how you'd measure success would be in terms of a reduction in the overall number of animal experiments worldwide. That would only be your true gauge of success in that. You either reduced the number or you prevented the number from increasing as much as it, would otherwise have increased without your campaign. It's the only way of kind of measuring real success, because you close one place down. If you don't affect the demand, for animals to be used for experimentation, they'll just be supplied from somewhere else. So you have to affect the demand.
But you can have that in-betweeny position, though, Ronnie, where by closing something down, if that works as an educational tool.
Yeah, you see education, you see, the two can go together. And, we've kind of seen how direct action can be used as an educational tool. Especially these days where it's done more openly, so people are able to have more of a voice about why they did it, and so you attract attention by doing the direct action, and then you use the attention that attracts in order to educate people. So yes, the two can go together, but if we're talking about, I think Jake's position is that there's a place for vegan outreach, but pressure campaigning is the most important thing, you see.
Yeah, and that brings to a question that we asked when we were setting this up, which is, if we had to choose one, which one is it going to be?
Well, all the various ways in which people kind of advocate and campaign for other animals. You've got rescue, you've got pressure campaigns, which can be protests, can be direct action, and you've got vegan outreach, vegan education. If I could only choose one of those, if only allowed to do one of those, I would choose vegan outreach every time, because that's the only way that you can change society at a fundamental level. And you see, it's got like a short-term benefit and a long-term benefit. In other words, that what you're doing is you're reducing demand for other animals to be exploited and killed. And when you look at here in the UK, every person who consumes animal products creates demand for almost 100 animals a year to be slaughtered. And in some countries that would be fewer. In other countries, perhaps the USA, it would be greater per person. So you're having an effect there.
You know that Jake would dispute that, don't you?
Well, that is the number that each person is responsible for consuming.
But he would say that if one person stops consuming, then the government just buys the flesh instead, etc.
Well, it's very, very interesting, because during COVID, now to what extent that is true, now that might be true to a small extent, but it was interesting during COVID when there was an impact on slaughterhouse workers got hit very badly by COVID, probably because of the conditions they worked in and they weren't given proper protection and stuff like that. They were really worried that there would be there would be no meat on the counters. They were really worried that there would be a shortage. So that points to there not being very much of a stockpile of it, if you see what I mean. So to what extent that is really true, that they still can produce the same amount and be paid for it, whatever, I don't know. I think that really threw cast doubt on that there was somehow this big stockpile of these things.
Yeah, but the answer to that is that they don't need it yet, because there's not that many vegans. See,
but nevertheless, it didn't. There wasn't that degree of overproduction. But you see, the thing is that somewhere, if there was no demand for animal products, if everyone consumed a vegan diet, then there would be no animal farming, there would be no fishing industry, right? So between the situation now and that situation, there has to be a reduction coinciding with the fall in consumption, doesn't there? Otherwise, you'd have everyone vegan and they're still producing the same amount of animal products, and that's not that's obviously wouldn't be true, would it?
No.
And then the other thing that I'd ask, say Jake, is like if he doesn't think that being vegan, in other words, he doesn't think not consuming animal products makes any difference, why is he himself a vegan if it makes no difference? He obviously must think it does make a difference, otherwise why is he one? You know what I mean? And that's to me, that's the short-term effect. This effect that the reduction of demand creates in terms of the number of animals that are exploited, that are used for the food industry.
Yeah, well, hopefully we shall have him in the flesh, as it were, to answer these questions.
That's right. But the other aspect of it is the kind of more long-term effect, in that if we educate, the only way, as I said probably countless times already, the only way that you're going to radically change the political administration of any country is to radically change the mindset of a large number of the population, because that's because I suppose in most countries of the world you've got some form of representative democracy, where people are, politicians voted into power. In others, you've still got the effect of popular opinion still has some, still makes a difference nevertheless to those that are in charge. And so unless we change a large number of ordinary people, we're never going to change anything, politically, are we? So we have to educate people to have a different mindset. And I think Jake tends to think of veganism probably just as a diet, because it tends to talk about it in terms of like consumerism.
Yeah, there is that element to it. That's right. Yeah.
Whereas the changing people's mindset would be much more based on it being a philosophy, of which the diet is.
He never talks about veganism as, say, the pioneers did, about the idea that it's part and parcel of the moral evolution of humanity, for example. Right? But he doesn't seem to do it that way.
But maybe he can't be blamed too much for that, because a lot of the kind of big so-called vegan voices these days don't talk of it in terms really of a philosophy either, do they? So you've got that, and so once again we're back to what I said earlier about outreach and inreach, that you have to kind of educate people not just to become vegan, but about what veganism really is. And if a sufficient number of people can be educated to become vegan in terms of what veganism really means, then we can have a revolution in terms of of how society operates.
Yeah, I got a bit of pushback there from Antonio. Jake doesn't, I'm not quite sure what that been. He knows it came out of a peace movement. Met him, it's a social movement. Yeah, so, well, that's an interesting one, because there are a lot of modern day vegans, apparently. I mean, we got this from Benny Malone. Apparently his conversations when he was researching his second book was that a lot of people in the movement now don't recognize themselves as being part of a social movement, which is absurd as far as I'm concerned, because it clearly is a social movement. But I'd agree with this. I mean, Jake does that. So there's two things. I think Jake puts veganism as part of that collective liberation, total liberation kind of ideas. But I think maybe he's got this idea that the veganism bit covers the diet side of it, aspect of it, or something like that. So I do think there is a kind of element of that, but I'm sure there's no misunderstanding from Jake Conroy that veganism is bigger than diet, but he does talk about it in those terms usually. So you've got that kind of contradiction again.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's a philosophy that can save the world. Veganism, you know, if we can get enough people to, you know, to
Yeah,
become.
I agree with that, Ronnie.
Yeah.
But again, that is because you are kind of faithful, if you like, or are in tune with what the founders of the movement said. But as we know, not many people are. I mean, I agree with you. You know, this idea that, you know, I dislike it when people say veganism is not enough. Now, veganism would be enough. It's the ultimate peace movement, right? So veganism on its own is enough to save the world in the way that it was formulated by the pioneers, the way they constructed the idea. It would save the world. In fact, people like Donald Watson said it's the only movement that can save humanity, right? So there is that. But I agree, there's a lot of pushback now. Oh, you know, just being vegan is not enough and all this kind of stuff. What that really translates to is probably just being plant-based is not enough, which is obviously true. Right. I think it's something.
Yeah,
like
I think that's true. I think it's people thinking, you know, veganism just as a diet is not enough. Yeah, if it's thought of as just a diet, but it isn't just a diet.
Yeah, well, this is where your inReach comes in, Ronnie. Most vegan social media platforms only say it's about our fellow animals only and diet. So this brings us to perhaps what might be the last bit, which is the fact that in Jake's construction of a pressure campaign, bringing all this whole bunch of things together and all that, it focuses on the supply side mainly, but not exclusively, as Ricky said before. And then he says this can bring about tangible success for our fellow animals. But the point is, just like he's critical of vegan outreach, as in kind of how do you know that as well? Because the track record so far is not good, is it, Ronnie?
No.
As much as we don't want to say that, it's true. I don't want to say that, but I mean, you know, kind of the Shack campaign was a failure.
It failed in its main objective. Yes, it did as well. You know, so did the Speak campaign. So did the ALF. I mean, the ALF is still going a little bit, but the ALF, in terms of Animal Liberation Front, we're going to bring about animal liberation, you know, through direct action. That's what it was all about. Well, kind of. Yeah, it got so far and then hit the buffers, which it was bound to do. Bound to hit the buffers of the state. They're not going to let people get away with that. You know,
and I suppose it to use that phrase, it hit the buffers in a way that vegan education won't, unless vegan education gets so successful that the state, as it were, will take action against that too, which is possible, I suppose.
It's possible, but I think much more difficult for them to do.
Yeah, because it's into things like civil liberties and that. Then, isn't
well,
it?
it's you know, trying to stop education, isn't there? And there's all sorts of ways of doing education. And
well, Trump is trying to do that pretty much at the moment.
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of them would love to stop vegan outreach if they could, but it's just that, you know, and over the years we've seen, you know, them get away with more and more in terms of, you know, repressing civil liberties, haven't we?
Yeah, but it's not that far-fetched, though, Ronnie. If they could actually bring in a statute which says that one citizen is not allowed to give another a leaflet or a flyer. I mean, at the moment,
that's within. You could see that being in the bounds of possibility. But you see, what you've got to remember is the more vegans we create, the more powerful voice veganism will have in order to resist any measure like that they try to bring in.
Yeah, Ricky's saying that the pro-Palestinian advocacy, a lot of censorship here. The same in Britain, but not in Ireland, I think.
Yeah.
The complaint here in Ireland is that it's a bit contradictory, because the government often say the right thing, but then they're still allowing flights and all the rest of it. Whereas, I mean, Britain has been a disgrace under Starmer about Palestine. You know, it's been an absolute disgrace, and you know, I mean, like, it's probably, that might be one of the things that will let the far right in. So that's another problem then.
Possibly. But you know, these things very much a, you know, very much a vegan issue. I mean, you know, like I've said for a long time, you know, campaigning against the arms trade is very much a vegan issue. You know, because of the number of lives destroyed by, particularly by sort of weapons of mass destruction, you know, like the kind of high explosives that are used, the rockets and the bombs and the shells that are used in wars these days, that mostly kill civilians, but even more than killing civilians, they kill our fellow animals. You know, our fellow animals are far more, you know, in greater number than victims.
Do we want to take this one on, Ronnie? I don't know. This is Deem Stars. I saw one social media influencer say that Trump tariffs would be good for the animals. I saw recently a vegan panel, which was basically saying that they were welcoming the election of Trump. They also thought that Musk might be quite good, particularly with this Doge stuff. And the guy that was supposed to be running Doge along with Musk, he'd said something like in a tweet that conservatives should care about animal welfare, which obviously from a vegan animal rights point of view means nothing. But they thought that was a really significant thing for somebody to say. Apparently that guy is now thrown out of Doge. And there was a report that he's been deported, but I think that's wrong. But there was a report that he's been deported already. But I mean, there's a lot going on there. But the idea that someone and some regime like Trump's and Musk's is going to be good for our fellow animals is just like fantasy land, really.
And these people are ignoring the huge area in which Trump is far worse for our fellow animals than the Democrats would have been. Not that the Democrats would have been great in any way whatsoever, or that Joe Biden was great in any way whatsoever for other animals. But the most harmful thing that Trump is doing and will do in terms of our fellow animals is his denial of the climate crisis and his tearing up of measures to combat the climate crisis, because, you know, the billions of free living beings in particular that are being destroyed because of that. You look at the fires in California, you know, are almost, you know.
What's he saying? Drill, baby, drill or something?
Yeah, you know, all these things, you know, let's burn more fossil fuels and, you know, to accelerate this devastating effect that, you know, humans have had on the natural world. You know, the number of fellow animals that have perished because of the climate crisis is horrendous. Far more than, you know, second only probably to the number that perished because of human consumption of animal products. It's probably the second worst area of the oppression of other animals. And Trump's going to make that massively worse. And that is the huge area where he is worse. But you get so few animal advocates even mention it or even think of it or even consider it.
Yeah. Weird enough. We're in strange times. We're back to where I started. So
what I wanted to do before I forget was show everyone it's the first time I've worn this T-shirt, but it does speak to, I don't know whether people can see it. Should I stand up so they can see it? There we are. I think that speaks to what we're talking about today, if you can read it.
Yeah. Slaughterhouses won't go away until you go vegan.
Yeah, exactly. Because while there's, you know, as you said earlier, while there's a demand, there'll be a supply.
Okay, thanks for that reference there. I shall check that out. Disaster nationalism. Well, unless they're saying that's what we are. So that's
a book this chap's written, is it?
Jennifer says your T-shirt is cool.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Right.
It's a one-off, I think. It was made by like a like a person who's got a little small business making T-shirts, and I think it's the only one of its kind.
All right, unique, just like you, Ronnie.
Yeah.
So, just to reiterate, then, Jake, if you see this, and we didn't construct it as an attack, it's just a thoughtful way around the fact that you were saying let's talk. So this is our version of that. So you're very welcome to come along, and we can do a 3-part. We've done one already, haven't we? Remember, we did one with Jake years ago.
Oh yes, we did. Yeah.
So you're very welcome to come along, or of course answer with another video of yours, and then we'll have to do a back and forth.
It'll never end.
But that's kind of totally up to you. But we've tried to be as constructive.
Yeah, I mean, my position really with regard to vegan outreach, as once again I've said many times before, is like an unless position, in that I think all these other forms of animal advocacy, are very worthy and have value, and and do move things in a positive direction. Whether people are doing animal rescue, we use hunt sabs, or whether it's pressure campaigns, maybe against vivisection or something. I think all these things are positive, but unless we have a great deal of vegan outreach, unless our main emphasis, shall we say, is on vegan outreach, then we're never going to create fundamental, widespread, radical change. So that's that's my what my position would be.
Yeah, we obviously need cultural change. I mean, we need a cultural revolution. It's just that at the moment, the world is not a progressive place, Ronnie.
Well, and it's because there's been insufficient education. Because the reason it's not a progressive place is because all these kind of reactionary leaders have been voted in by ordinary people. That's the tragedy of it.
Yeah, well, if that is true, still, I mean,
the thing is, they kind of haven't necessarily been voted in by a majority in terms of the overall vote, but they've been voted in by very large numbers of the population.
Well, I think the electoral system in the USA is bent as a 2-bob note, but I mean, I think that the British one is getting the same. I mean, it's almost like I mean, even more than I always used to say. You probably heard me say this before, that politicians are not leaders; they're followers. They follow the vote and they follow the money. But, I mean, in terms of the money, I mean, like, politicians are up for sale more so than you would like to think could ever have happened. Really, seems to me.
Yeah, and I think the other thing really to be said with regard to pressure campaigning is I think it appeals very much to the emotions, in that there's a target to go for, and there's that place over there. That place is oppressing our fellow animals. Let's close that place down. There's a target there. You can see it. The animals are in there.
I did have a note about that, but I forgot. But the point is, Ronnie, that makes them valuable just because of that, doesn't it?
Well, I think the thing is, I think what I'd like to see with pressure campaigns is wouldn't like to see them go away. I'm solidarity with people involved in these campaigns, but I'd like to see them contain more of a vegan educational element. I mean, they do to some extent, in that you get vegans involved in these campaigns and non-vegans come along and rub shoulders with the vegans and they become vegans. But that doesn't educate the ordinary public. That just educates activists to become vegan, if you see what I mean. But I think that they I'd like to see always mindful of how can we include a kind of become vegan message or go vegan message in what we do.
I get that, Ronnie, but I'm trying to focus on the other bit that you just touched on, which is almost like the psychological relief of a victory. I mean, we are human. We need that, don't we?
Yeah, we do. But the problem is that the kind of victories are very often not really victories, and kind of pseudo victories in a way. false victories.
You
Pyrrhic-
mean we con
Pyrrhic
ourselves?
victories, isn't it? They call it. Isn't that thing called Pyrrhic victories?
Yeah, Pyrrhic. Yeah,
Vic-
but do
victories
you
not.
think do you think we kind of con ourselves then in that sense?
I think people do. I think people do con themselves. I mean, I spoke about the, the live export thing and didn't kind of quite finish what I was saying, because I was saying about, animals will still be exported to these countries because of the demand. But the other thing is of course, and a lot of these exports would still continue from the European Union, and the reason why the UK was able to ban live exports was because of Brexit, because UK was no longer governed by the EU law and didn't have to fall in line with the EU on live exports. But the downside of it is now that the UK is no longer in the EU, we have no voice in trying to stop the export of live animals from the EU, and it's continuing from the EU. So there is a really big downside to Brexit in that sense.
Well, funny enough, Ronnie.
Yeah.
In one of the articles, we didn't get around to it, but in one of the articles that we had lined up, it was saying that Brexit has actually been one of the factors that have really hit the restaurant business in Britain really bad.
Yeah, probably if it's made imports more expensive and stuff like that. Yeah. And a lot of this stuff comes from other countries, doesn't it? That's cooked there and that. So yeah, so I can very well see that. But it's interesting. We had one of our local vegan cafes closed down 2 years ago. Been open for 5 years, and it closed down 2 years ago. And the place where it was always always in operation. Before it had been a vegan cafe, it was a bookshop that served tea and coffee type thing. That's what it was before. It closed down 2 years ago. That the premises is still empty. They've not been able to rent it to anyone. And along that same street, loads of small businesses have closed, and the places are still empty. So it's certainly not just something to do with a place being vegan. It's much more universal than that.
Can't you start a charity shop there, Ronnie?
Well, I don't know whether it's too expensive for the charity shops to operate as well, because
they'll have to give you
I
it free.
think they do give people favourable rents, but no, there's not been. And there are one or two charity shops in that road, but no others have. A lot of loads of places are empty.
I don't think people who run charity shops have to pay rent, do they? Isn't that the idea?
I think they may have to pay something. I don't know, but nevertheless, they've not been taken over by charity shops mostly. And that's people probably have similar experiences throughout the country of where small businesses have closed and the places are still empty because the rents and rates are so high.
Right. Okay. Well, look, we're waffling now, Ronnie. So
we are. We're going on a tangent, as always.
But I think it's been an interesting show. And Jake, do come on if you so wish. And we will be here waiting, providing, Ronnie, that
we are still alive.